I remember that day very specifically. Kevin O'Leary pointing his finger at me across the thing, and we didn't really know each other at that point, right?
That's such a scam. Like, that's just totally BS.
I was just like, yo, fuck it. They might not invite me back, but I'm going down swinging.
Pompliano. Anthony Pompliano, founder of Pomp Investments and an early Bitcoin investor.
Bitcoin bulls are back.
All you had to do in 2020 was buy Bitcoin and chill. And you outperformed every single hedge fund on Wall Street. And that pisses a lot of people off. But guess what? If you're really, truly independently thinking or critically thinking, you have to be willing to do the unpopular thing.
We all have this kind of voice in our head. It's what the kid in school said to you in the playground, or like what your parents said to you. These insecurities, which are almost part of our personality. It's a bit like, oh, you could never do that thing. Like, you're just not made for this.
Do you agree with the voice in your head, or do you tell it to fuck off? A lot of people who have the voice in their head, they want to turn it down. Man, get out of my head, get out of my head. Right? I said, turn that shit up. I disagree.
It takes self-confidence to be disagreeable. Where did the confidence, like, where does it emanate from?
I think a lot of it just comes from not only testing yourself over time, but also...
So the Callum Johnson Show, I'm Callum. We got the man of the moment back in New York, Pomp.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic.
You know what? I was coming into New York this morning, and I always think on my journey in, I'm like, where do I want to start? And the conclusion I came to, I want to start with when I first found out about you.
Okay.
Which is, and you know what would be interesting from your perspective? How many people say this? I'm watching CNBC, 2019. I'm just starting to hear about Bitcoin, just starting to think about it. You're on a panel. There's Kevin O'Leary. There's a bunch of other people there. And they're just firing at you. They're coming at you. You know, I actually have direct quotes. Crypto crap, no long-term value, no intrinsic value, pure speculation. And I remember you would just, each point they would make, you would just sit there calmly and just refute it with like stats and evidence. And I was like, oh, this guy knows what he's talking about.
Nah, I'm just a good shit talker.
It's like all of that is BS. But yeah, needless to say, I invested in Bitcoin shortly after. But to be honest, I wanted to start with this. How has, obviously at that moment, I think Bitcoin was at $8,000. Obviously, it's a lot more than that now. How has kind of your viewpoint, your thesis on Bitcoin evolved since then? Are you more bullish, less bullish?
Yeah.
Where are we at? This episode is brought to you by Free Agency. If you want to take your career to the next level, Free Agency is a company that you should check out. They manage and represent talent in the tech industry, and they provide you with a dedicated talent agent to help you find, engage, and win top of market roles that will maximize your earning potential. No more leaving money on the table. Stop job searching alone and start building your dream career today with Free Agency. Anyway, back to the show.
I'm exactly the same bullish, right? And what I mean by that is when I first found out about Bitcoin, it was through somebody else. While I was working at Facebook, they were talking about Bitcoin. So I turned to an engineer and I was basically just like, hey, what is this? And he said it was stupid. Okay, fine. Like, you're smarter than me, right? Like, okay. Didn't Google it, didn't really do anything. And then in 2016, somebody approached me and they wanted me to look at mining, but it wasn't about Bitcoin. It was actually with Ethereum, with Ether. And they didn't pitch me on like crypto. It was just, if you understand data centers, this is like a different computer and it's got a bunch of advantages over traditional data center and better economics. So like, you should invest in it. And for better or worse, I did. And so from there, that's kind of like how I got down into the rabbit hole. Now, it took a while for me to kind of understand what are all these different things, right? You know, where's value, what's kind of bullshit, all of that. But once I started to really understand Bitcoin, I realized that the thing that makes it so hard for people in the traditional world to understand is exactly what gives it value. Our entire worldview is predicated on the idea that there's a central bank, they print money, that money then incentivizes us to spend the money we have in our bank account in order to consume. And so like, that is how the traditional world works. But who's to say that that is ultimately the right way to do it? And so in some weird way, Bitcoin requires you to be a critical thinker and kind of think outside of the system that you grew up in, which is very, very hard to do. It's why a lot of people internationally are able to better comprehend it, is because they're like, well, like, my currency sucks, right? You know, hyperinflation or whatever, you know, is kind of the local problem. They realize that the national currency may not actually be the ultimate solution that it was pitched as. In the United States, that's still really hard to see because actually the dollar is like very very good. And if you give many of those people in emerging markets specifically the option between Bitcoin or dollars, a lot of them want dollars, right? A lot of them don't want Bitcoin. And it's less about like Bitcoin's bad, dollars are good. It's just like they know dollars, right? They're able to transact in dollars. There's stability to the price. Like there's all these advantages to dollars that is what attracts them to it. So I say all of that with this idea that like Bitcoin as a technology is simply a piece of technology. So when all those guys are yelling at me and they're like, it's speculation, it's like, okay, well, what's a stock market? That's just fucking gambling with a license, right? Like literally that is a casino that they put out there that people are allowed to quote unquote invest. But if you go to Las Vegas and you ask people what they're doing, half the people in there tell you they're investing too, right? Now they're gambling because we don't like the way that they're doing it. The odds are stacked against them. But actually, if you go and you take a look at the stock market, it's very similar. Now, I'm not going to suggest that, pulling a slot machine and investing in a company is the same risk or the same reward. But what I am saying is that it's speculation, right? You're speculating on the future price point. That's how a market gets made. Because some people think it's going to go up, some people think it's going to go down, and one side is going to be determined correct by the market. The second thing is when they start to say things like intrinsic value, what the fuck is intrinsic value? Right. And so when I say that, all of like the old school stock folks would be like, what do you mean intrinsic value is this or that? And they've come up with their evaluation methodologies. It's all opinion. There is no such thing as intrinsic value. Tomorrow, if the world decides that gold is no longer valuable, it's not valuable anymore, right? If we all of a sudden decide that a certain currency is valuable, now that currency is valuable. If we all over time decide that a PE multiple is X or Y and that changes, now all of a sudden that is true. And so this idea of like intrinsic value is something that it sounds good, but when you really unpack what they're saying, is they're saying this thing is valuable regardless of what the opinions are. And as we've seen throughout history, there's a lot of things that people thought were valuable at one point. And then when the world decided and consensus was reached that it wasn't as valuable, the value plummeted. And so same thing with companies, right? How many companies would you go and you would say, okay, in 2021, people would evaluate the balance sheet of a business and they would tell you it's worth X. Forget what the stock price is. They would say the intrinsic value of this business is X. Okay. And now what do they think? That intrinsic value somehow fell, but the assets didn't change. Yeah. Right. And so you kind of get into these things and it's a lot of nuance, a lot of like finance talk or whatever, but it's some fundamental things that are believed in the traditional financial system are untrue. Intrinsic value being one, efficient market hypothesis being another. And these are things that people literally have won awards for. Like a guy came up with the idea of efficient market hypothesis and won an award. He's wrong. Take his award back, right? Like you can't take these people seriously in terms of their evaluation of financial markets if you give awards to people who are provably wrong. And so I think that's really where Bitcoin in some weird way is the outcome of a bunch of critical thinking about the legacy system. Now, does that guarantee it's going to be successful? No. Same exact thing as the traditional world, right? If we're going to rail against them, we can also rail against kind of the new world as well. If all of a sudden the world wakes up and everyone says this isn't valuable anymore, it won't be valuable, right? And so it really is a human-driven kind of market dynamic. Now, people will debate, and I would argue that there's some things that Bitcoin has that the traditional system doesn't have, right? That makes it have some value to some portion of people in the world. But I think that it ultimately gets at this idea of like, well, maybe it's not an either or, maybe it's and. And that's why I become so bullish on Bitcoin is because if you said to me that Bitcoin has to take out the US dollar to be successful, look, it's possible. It's going to be really hard. I got a lot more confidence that it's going to take out the Bolivar in Venezuela, right? Than it is going to take out the US dollar. And obviously there's a ranging scale. But if you said to me, well, maybe what's happening already is actually where all the value is going to reside, which is stable coins on this new technology are more popular for transactions than Bitcoin is. So people want to buy Bitcoin and hold it. 70% of circulating supply is just held by people for the long term. And dollars are being used to transact. Well, that sounds pretty interesting because now you have Bitcoin and dollars both winning. And in that world, it's now less of a competition and it's almost this like coexistence or co-success. And I think that there's a lot of people in the legacy system that say, okay, that sounds cool to me. It's like gold 2.0, right? And we got dollars for transactions. And there's a lot of people in the Bitcoin world who all of a sudden say, whew, I thought we were going to take out the dollar, right? I thought we were going to have to compete with the greatest nation on earth and their native currency. But now if we can just coexist and succeed alongside them, like that's much more easy. And so I think that really right now seems to be where we're headed.
You know what? And I didn't even intend for this to be like a a deep Bitcoin.
I know,
conversation.
man. Everyone
You just did it, Paul. You just did it. But I think, you know what? When I watched the video and when I watched it in 2019, what was so appealing to me was the way that you spoke, which is, I think when it comes to especially new technologies or anything that challenges the conventional wisdom, it stirs up a lot of emotion. And you hear a lot of this like emotive language. Like there's people have like a stake in it. It almost like challenges their worldview. And so it becomes very opinion based. And I found that when you were speaking, it was very much like, okay, here's the data, here's what's happening. It seemed very objective. Like, this is why I think what I think. It's not like some emotional thing. And that appealed. And so I always thought to myself, and even the delivery, it was like calm, it was cool, it was collected. And so I kind of wanted to, I always thought to myself, if I ever spoke to you, I'd want to know where that came from. And in particular, when I say I want to know what that came from, there was a kind of a clean understanding of, you know, this is almost like a game. Like making money is almost a game. Succeeding in the world, entrepreneurship, all this stuff is a game. And I know the rules of the game. And here's how it's played out historically. And because these are the rules and here's what's happening, I've built this hypothesis and this thesis based off that. It very much came from like first principles thinking, I would say, and just understanding the fundamentals and how everything is played. And it's funny because there's even, there's this quote from Naval where he says, there's three things that matter in life, right? What you do, where you live, and who you do it with. And even when I was doing my research on you, I was like, if you take those three categories, it feels like your life is optimized in those areas, right? Like you just moved back to New York. You've always been very intentional with where you live. Obviously what you work on, I heard you on My First Million talking about investments and all this stuff. Your wife, like it just seems like a great fit. Obviously I'm not in your relationship, but it seems like a great fit. And so I wanted to know, like, where did that begin? And you know what? Is my hunch even correct? When I see you and I'm like, okay, it seems like it's been almost, it's like strategic. Like there's like an understanding of the fundamentals of the principles. And then I'm going to optimize my life against that. Was that in your thinking or did this just kind of randomly come about?
I definitely don't have like a master plan. Actually, if there's been one critique throughout my career from many people that I would seek advice from, they're like, what are you like optimizing for 5 years from now, 10 years from now? And they would get incredibly frustrated when I would say, I don't know. Right. Yeah. Because I think a lot of people, especially people who have been successful and specifically follow traditional paths, they're very much like, okay, I'm going to go to this school. I'm then going to get a job in investment banking for 2 years. Then I'm going to leave and go to a private equity firm. And then I'm going to do, and like they have like their whole life planned out. Like that's boring to me. Right. Now, at the same time, I have a very, very high appetite for risk, almost to the point of it's scaring other people. But many of the things that they see as risky, I don't actually think are risky, right? If we go back to, you know, just use Bitcoin as an example. If I go talk to people on Wall Street, they'll tell you Bitcoin is the single riskiest thing they have in their portfolio. But if I go talk to a 22-year-old like crypto degen, they're laughing at me. They're like, dude, you got boomer coin. Right? Like, what are you doing? You're not even anywhere near taking risk. Yeah. And so actually it looks risky to the traditional world, but it's the right type of risk. It's the riskiest thing for the conservative people, but it's the least risky thing for the really risky people. And I think that's like a great place to kind of sit in, right? Now, if you look at it from like a life design standpoint, I really only fundamentally pursue two things. I want to be happy. And when I die, basically want to look back and say, I use my time wisely, right? And a lot of that stems from when I was 20, 21 years old. And I've told the story publicly before, but there was an incident when I was in Iraq, somebody died. And when that happened, I realized it was like a flashing red sign in my face for like months. You are going to die. Not right now, hopefully, right? But like at some point you die. So do you, and so does everyone else listening or watching this. And so when you get that understanding, this like kind of like, I don't know if it's like a mental safety or a mental understanding of mortality. All of a sudden you realize whatever I do today could be the last time that I do it. right? Am I actually getting kind of all of the juice out of life? And so when you're young, and I made, whether it was a mistake or in hindsight, I have very fond memories, that manifests itself in like, I bought a motorcycle and I go flying down the highway. Like, we're going to die. Like, let's have fun, in case it's today's the day, right? Now, as you mature, you realize like maybe that's just like taking reckless risk. And instead you start to focus on things like, what do I actually want in life, right? What am I willing to do? What am I not willing to do? And where I would say that I really depart from a lot of my peers is I'm not willing, or I am willing to make decisions that may seem unpopular in the moment. So I decided to move to Miami as an example at the end of 2020. There was nobody talking about moving to Miami then, right? There was no Miami movement or any of this stuff. And so when that happened, there was a lot of people actually who ended up moving who were very anti leaving their cities, et cetera. But also, if you take it a step further back, I stayed in New York City in my apartment with my now wife the entire pandemic. From the day it hit, a lot of people don't know this. I worked at a building on 42nd Street, and the very first confirmed case of COVID in New York City was in that building, four floors below me.
Jeez.
And I went home that day when they told us, and I told Pompliano, I was like, yeah, I think I'm dying. Like, right? like obviously that's what I read in the news, right? Like here we go. Yeah. And we didn't know a lot, right? People were still trying to figure out like, what is this thing or whatever. But the story came out. It's like, there's a guy who he came in from, I think it was Westchester, came into Grand Central. I Googled 750,000 people a day go through Grand Central. Obviously they're not gonna be able to control this thing, right? It's an airborne thing, and you kind of read all about it. And I said, we have a decision. We can leave or we can stay. And a lot of our friends were leaving. They were going in, getting Airbnbs in like the woods. They were going home and staying in like their childhood bedrooms at their parents' house. Some of them had vacation homes. They do all kinds of crazy stuff. And we stayed. And actually that was the unpopular thing. And I remember getting on Zoom calls in the middle of April, May, June, and people would be like, you're in New York City? And I used to joke with them. I say, yeah, the safest place after a crime? It's at the crime scene. That's where all the cops are, right? like where's the safest place? Around all the hospitals, around all the emergency services, whatever. Yeah. But it was just like, that's what we wanted to do. We felt like that was the right decision for us, regardless of what the rest of the world thought. We went to Florida. Go back and read the headlines at the end of 2020. People were talking about how everyone's going to die in Florida, right? Because they don't have the mask mandates and vaccines, and they're letting people go into clubs. The first time we went, I walked out of a restaurant at, 11:30 at night, and I looked down the street, and in south of 5th on South Beach, literally there was people lined up to go in a club. And I didn't feel comfortable going in a club. Right? Oh, I'm not doing that. Like, that's crazy. Those people are wild.
Those are some risk takers.
Yeah, like those are risk takers, right? But I'll move here. And so I always think about just like, if you're really truly independently thinking or critically thinking, you have to be willing to do the unpopular thing. But that also means that, as I titled the piece about moving back to New York, when the facts change, you got to be willing to change your mind, right? And so a lot of people will say, well, if you knew everything you knew today, would you have done the decisions that you made? Like, would you have done it over 100%, right? Because actually for 2.5 years, it was the right decision. Now I think that for my personal situation and for what I'm personally interested in doing, right, it's time to move back. And so I just think that having the self-confidence and maybe the awareness of being willing to make these decisions and not care what anyone else thinks really helps. And so when you go and you look at, on national television, all these people are yelling at me. I'm just sitting there saying, you guys are emotional because you actually have no skin in the game. You're being emotional because mentally you need to feel good that you're right. I don't care about being right. I got real skin in the game. And if I'm wrong, I'm going to lose a lot of money. But if I'm right, I'm going to make a lot of money. And that's how I think that financial markets should work. Skin in the game, true, let the asset, let the market be the referee. But when people get really emotional, it usually is they don't have skin in the game, because you would never have skin in the game and be emotional. You can't be a irrational thinker and last long in markets. And then two is you're usually doing it because the thing that you are getting emotional about is threatening your way of life, your self-identity, some organization that you claim to belong to, whatever. And that's for years what I saw happening was people couldn't believe that all you had to do for the last 3 years, right? We're not talking about be in Bitcoin in 2012. All you had to do in 2020 was buy Bitcoin and chill. And you outperformed every single hedge fund on Wall Street. And that pisses a lot of people off. But guess what? There's a lot of people who did that. And if you then take it even a step further, there's a lot of people who didn't forget Bitcoin. Bitcoin's the risky asset for the traditional world. There are millions of people who have been outperforming hedge funds for decades by just buying the S&P 500. Like, you literally are smarter than the hedge funds if you just buy the S&P 500 and wait for 20 years. Let them try to beat you. They can't. And so that is, again, like a data-driven analysis of what are you going to do? What are you trying to accomplish? If you want to build wealth, you don't have to go do all the fancy stuff. But do the simple stuff. It's just the simple stuff requires you to admit, I don't need to be smarter than the market. I can just do this simple thing and let time work its magic and go from there.
You know what? It's difficult to go against what's popular. And I guess in the example that you gave, it's difficult to go against like the sexy thing or like the thing that's hot.
Until you know that that's the game. It's all pattern recognition. So now when I see something get hot, I immediately think, what's the opposite? Right? It's like a playbook. It's like, imagine if you played football and every time the team comes out, right, and they got no wide receivers on the field, you're like, it might be a run. Right? High probability it might be a run. Maybe we should put our run defense in. Same thing here is whenever something gets hot, the odds that the hot thing ends up actually working in the next 2 to 5 years is usually pretty low. Doesn't mean always. And so what you have to do is you have to default to it's probably not going to work. It's probably a hype cycle. But in order to confirm the default position, you then have to go do the work. And so if you take a look at something like Bitcoin, if you went and you looked at something like Bitcoin in 2011, 2012, yeah, it didn't work. It went up a lot and then it crashed. And if that's all the work that you did was just look at price, you probably walked away, probably sold. But then if you could start to understand it, it's a pretty good thing to hold for a long time, right? I always think of one of the stories that never gets nearly enough coverage is a gentleman named Bill Miller. And if Bill ever watches this, he's going to just laugh to himself. But when Amazon went public, the stock ran up to over $100. It was like $113, $114, right? Internet stocks were going crazy, .com, mania, the whole thing. Amazon stock crashed. And it crashed like most stocks crash. It went from 100 to 80, then it hung around 60, then it went to 40. People were like, damn, it went from 100 to 40, it's down 60%. How much lower could it go? It went to $6. Bill started buying Amazon during the crash. I don't remember exactly when. He emerged on the other side of the .com bust as the single largest shareholder of Amazon. And he held it. The amount of courage it takes to deploy capital into a stock that is down more than 95%, it's hard to explain to someone. And it's not just making a market call. You're not going on television saying, I think. You're literally betting money that it's going to happen. And it turned out to be one of the best investments in history because he was buying Amazon stock when it was drastically undervalued. And it ended up being one of the best performing stocks over the next 20 years. And so my guess, and I've never asked Bill this, but my guess is he realized some percentage of the stocks that are crashing right now are going to survive and they'll thrive. I just need to find the ones that are the good ones because everyone is throwing them all together and saying they're all worthless. He understood how market crashes work and he went shopping when everyone was selling. Genius.
No, that's what you're meant to do. But I guess when the emotions get involved, and you know what, I'm curious if this has ever happened for you, because it's like, and you even said it earlier, you change when the facts change. So when you moved from Miami to New York, I guess things changed in your life, your viewpoint changed, you come back to New York. I'm curious.
New York changed. That's what changed. New York changed, right? If you were to ask me the entire time I lived in Miami, everyone would tell you, oh, he's a New Yorker who lives in Miami, right? Like just like that was the way that we live our life, the way that, we think, the things that we like, all that stuff. But New York, end of 2020, early 2021, a lot different than New York, mid 2023. And so there's a bunch of stuff in terms of public health, around crime, around government, around business, kind of environment, around monetary policy, all these different things, right? And so that's where I talk about, it's not so much saying New York is going to die, right? San Francisco, like use one that I don't live in, right? San Francisco is a great example. One of the single greatest things I think someone could do right now in their early 20s is move to San Francisco if you want to be in the tech industry. Still got the highest density of entrepreneurial energy, still got some of the best investors in the world that are there. It's still got the highest density of talent to recruit, and everyone hates it. Everyone's talking shit. Put your big boy or girl pants on, run into the fire, and when they put the fire out, they're going to be like, damn, did you see the person who ran into the fire? Right? But if you allow yourself to get swept up in the narrative, then you think, you know, San Francisco tomorrow is going to be condemned. They're going to shut the city down and kick everyone out because, you know, it's over. Come on. New York City was like that once, right? Crime was horrible. They fix it. So I always think about, a lot of people talk about making the opposite bet. And to your point, it's hard to do in the moment. But when you begin to realize that a lot of the best decisions in life go against the grain, just wait till you see too much consensus, right? It's kind of like making an asymmetric bet. 99% of people think X. Damn, well, what's the payoff if I look at Y, right? But you got to have the discipline to recognize, oh, wait, the consensus is like offsides. Too many people believe X, that if it's not true, Y is underpriced. It's just practice, right? You see it enough times, and then, you know, we can talk about topics all day long, and I could tell you, like, hey, right now this one seems hot. I don't know. And sometimes you're right, sometimes you're not. But the beauty of the asymmetry is you don't got to get a lot of them right. You just got to get more right than you get wrong, and you're good to go.
I'm curious, what happens when your point of view becomes the consensus, right? So I spoke in 2019, Bitcoin's at 8,000. When it's rising and everyone's now wants to get in, and Bitcoin is like, oh, this is it. Everyone's going to it. How difficult is it for you, even if, and you know what, let me say it like this.
Your consensus view or your contrarian view has to become consensus for you to be right. Right? If you do something different and no one ever else realizes the value of it, you're probably not going to make money or reap the benefit. But actually what you're doing by being quote unquote contrarian, which is like such a played out term at this point, is that you're betting on something, but you need everyone else to eventually see your viewpoint. So that's like the secret of the contrarianism, is that actually contrarians have to become the consensus kind of position, because that's where the payoff is. Whether it's a monetary and financial thing, or, you know, social capital or whatever. But when you see the consensus shifting from believing X to believing what you believe Y, then you're like, here we go.
Yeah. You know, I'm curious, does the emotion ever get into it for you? And here's what I mean, is your brand is so associated with Bitcoin. You've gotten in so many panels, in so many debates over Bitcoin. It's like, it's kind of hard. It's like me acting like I'm not English or something. Like, it's so much part of me that I'm like, if I was like, yeah, that actually never happened. It's hard to move away from that viewpoint. And so even when you say like, you'll change if the facts change, is it one of those things where like, because we're all human at the end of the day. And so objectively the facts can change, but your interpretation of it, because you have such a tie to it, you have so much invested in it, you have reputation, it's difficult. Like, it is more difficult for you to step away from Bitcoin than it is like for me, for example.
No.
Why?
Because that's the outside perception. Right? Tomorrow, if I discovered a fact and I thought that Bitcoin was going to be 0, okay, I'm done. Sell it all and move on. Right? If I tied my actual identity, not what other people perceive, my identity to Bitcoin, which for better or worse, some people do, right? To financial assets. There's people will be like, you know, from a value investor, like a strategy, all the way up to an asset, you know, Bitcoin, Tesla, there's a bunch of these, I think, that people really, really start to tie their reputations to, or tie their own personal kind of self-identity to. Yeah, it'd be really hard. It's like leaving a religion,
Mm.
right? If you ask me, who I am, I'm very comfortable in that skin. If whether it's me talking about Bitcoin, we can sit here, we can talk about geopolitics, we can talk about anything you want to talk about. You want to debate, the height of the sidewalk outside and whether it should be higher or lower because it rains and sometimes it floods.
Yeah.
Right? It's just, I just want to learn, right? Like ultimately that is what I'm spending my time on, is I'm trying to learn. And so when you think that about yourself, like that's the most important story. It's not what's in a headline. It's not how your friends or people on the internet perceive you. It's who are you? And I think that we have this massive like international crisis. There's a lot of people who are super insecure, right? And some of it is just psychologically, like humans have always been insecure, right? There's things I'm probably insecure about if I really sat and thought about it. But ultimately, can you actually get the confidence to be secure and know who you are, right? Now, one of the best ways to do that, get put in a lot of stressful situations, right? Get really tested over time, and you kind of understand what are your boundaries, right? What are you good at? What are you not good at? What do you enjoy doing? What do you not enjoy doing? But if you really think about most Americans, my guess is that they're actually pretty insecure. And so whenever they have any degree of success with something, they're all in. They tie their identity to it. But think about some of the most successful people in the world. They reinvent themselves all the time. Martha Stewart went to jail, and now she's doing videos with Snoop Dogg, right? And everyone's like, oh, Martha Stewart. Like she's had like 5 careers, right? If you take someone like The Rock literally was a college football player who wanted to play in the NFL and he failed. Then he was broke, right? Then he was a wrestler. Now he's a movie star. Now he's, I think, like the second most recognizable person on the planet. It helps to be like 6'6" and 260 pounds and just a maniac. But at the same time, like that guy has reinvented himself over and over and over again. Mark Wahlberg, another great example, right? He's a rapper. Everyone now knows him as, a praying actor who's got a bunch of companies. But like, if you go back and I think if you were to ask Mark Wahlberg about this, my guess is he would tell you he learned a lot. He had some pretty tough times when he was a kid, right? There was an incident where I think he got arrested and went to jail because he assaulted someone. That's not the person that we see today. And so some of that's maturity, right? That definitely helps. But a lot of that is people becoming comfortable with, who are you? What do you want to accomplish in your life? Like, who do you want to be? And then going and acting in that manner. And so I just think that we get very caught up on, what does everyone else think about me, right? We got a TV production studio in our pockets now. People film shit. It's all about, what are the people on Instagram going to think about me? The greatest thing you can do in today's world is I don't give a fuck what anybody thinks about me. I am who I am, and I'm going to go act accordingly. And I think that the more people who do that, just they'll see their life, their business, their career, all that stuff just take off because nobody's paying attention, right? We're going to do this. You may think about some of the things we talk about today for 24, 48 hours. And then guess what you're going to do? You're going to prepare for your next interview, right? Nah, come on, right? But like that's really what it comes down to is people get very caught up in like, what does everyone else think? Or I'm going to make decisions because of what everyone else is going to think. How many people in the United States, we're not even going to go globally, just in the United States, married someone because they thought they were supposed to do it? It's a much higher percentage than people want to admit, right? How many people took the job that they thought they were supposed to take because of what their parents or what their family or their friends or their former colleagues were going to think, right? I'm not going to live a life where the day I die, I just say, fuck, I wish I. Just go do this stuff. And guess what? If you fail, you fail. Who cares? Like, you can just be a resilient human and you move on.
What's interesting? So I have two, well, actually I have a bunch of younger siblings, but right now I spend a lot of time with my 2 younger sisters. And it's interesting when you watch like young children develop, because you see almost like this tipping point and this evolution. So it begins when they're young. They really just do whatever the fuck they want.
Yeah.
And it's actually, as an adult, it's incredibly refreshing to see someone just acting purely out of what they want to do. And there comes a point where, and it's you can almost see it if you really observe. You can see them observing and just seeing the world and what everyone else is doing. And it's probably a mixture of school, of just like living in society, of their parents, of everything. But it's almost like they become a more and more like watered down version of themselves. They become more and more cognizant of everything happening around them and how they fit in. And it's interesting, even like the contrarian, and it is a term that's played out, but it's difficult to be an actual contrarian, right? If you look at some of the most impressive, inspiring people in history, I think about Steve Jobs with the iPhone. When no one thought, everyone was like, what, touchscreen phone? Like, no one's going to do that. I think about Elon Musk and electric vehicles. Now everyone's moving towards electric vehicles, but I remember growing up, that was like the most uncool thing you could think of driving. Even now, like I watch a lot of sports, I'm looking at like what Deion Sanders is doing. The way that he's using like media and all of these things, the way that he speaks. I saw something about like the way that he designates players on their uniforms, like all of this stuff. It's different to the conventional wisdom. And you see a lot of other football coaches, they have like these little snide remarks about him. Because of that, it's incredibly difficult to be the contrarian point of view. However, if you can do it, and if one of your contrarian bets is correct, the upside is so huge. And I want to pair what I've just said with the second point, which is I graduated from university a few years ago, right? I always say to my peers, and when I'm talking with friends and stuff who have kind of gone the more traditional route, when you're young, it's the best time to take on risk because you don't have responsibility. So we have huge upside. We have great timing in your life. But most people, especially at my age, they want the safe bet, right? I want the banking job with the 6-figure salary. I want to be a doctor. I want to be a lawyer. Like, these are great careers, but a lot of it's not what they want to do. And so I want to get into the story of Pomp, because I feel like when you're young, it feels so difficult to take that contrarian viewpoint, when in fact that contrarian viewpoint, it's the most opportune. It's the best timing for you, but it's so difficult.
One way I would describe it is disagreeableness. So if you were to go talk to teachers I had in high school, a word that I think that they would use, he was a smart ass, right? They'd be like, they'd roll their eyes like, oh, that's smart ass, right?
Yeah.
But if you then look at it, no, I just questioned it all. Why do we have to do that? That doesn't make any sense. Why should we do that? Is that really going to be the thing that helps us all, get smarter, or whatever specific point it was? And so in an environment where you are disincentivized from questioning the authority, it's a massive problem, right? And I was bad enough where me and the principal, we hung out too much, right? But I wasn't so bad where I ever felt like I was potentially going to get like kicked out of school or anything. Like it was when I was a freshman in high school. My father always tells a story that the headmaster, like the principal, called him up and said, "I need to see you." So my dad goes and he says, your son, he's like difficult or like different. My dad's like, okay, right? Like what? And he goes, yeah, he basically like, he knows exactly where the line is. And if we turn our back, he puts his toe over the line and he'll wait till we turn on to make sure they know that he put his foot over the line, and then he'll pull it back. Being a smart ass, right? And to my parents' credit, they basically were like, okay, so you're saying that our son like thinks for himself, and they didn't necessarily want us to break the rules and get in trouble, but they had much more leeway, I think, in terms of us trying to figure it out than many parents who would say, oh my God, the teacher's upset. It was very much, if the teacher was upset, well, were you right or was the teacher right? Like there was a little bit more of an even playing field. And I think it's hard, right? I got a kid. Like, am I going to have the courage and the discipline to do that? Or am I going to tell my kid, hey, knock it off? The teacher, listen to the teacher. It's hard. And so I just think that disagreeableness in society is generally kind of disincentivized and like punished. But actually, if you look at change and innovation, it's an essential ingredient. And so how much better off as a society would we be if we actually taught kids to be disagreeable? Do it in a respectful way. But actually we need more disagreeableness, not less. But our entire education system is optimized for the exact opposite. And it's probably hurting us.
You know what? You said an interesting word earlier, which is self-awareness, self-confidence. It takes self-confidence to be disagreeable, right? Because a lot of people, you have an opinion, but at the second that someone else disagrees with it, you kind of step back. It's a lack of confidence. And so I want to, like, where did that start for you? Like, where did the confidence, like, where does it emanate from? Where does it come from?
I think one, you just test yourself enough, right? And eventually you're just like, okay, I can do this. I'm right more times than I'm wrong. If I discover at any point in this, argument or debate that I have a bad assumption, I'm wrong, whatever, I'll quickly switch around and immediately start arguing something else, right? Like, it's just like how do I get at the truth is much more important than like, I'm quote unquote right. I was talking to someone earlier today and we were talking about a couple of investments, and there's a public narrative that I don't want to get into, but everyone has got a high degree of consensus around. And I said, I actually think that they're right, but this asset's still going to go up in price for this other reason. So like, they're right, but if everyone shorts it, they're going to lose money. And it goes back to, do you want to be right or do you want to make money? And sometimes actually, maybe if you're playing a social capital game, you want to be right. Because you want to point back and say, see, I told you. But if you've got skin in the game, if the objective is to make money, then you can't get sucked into the narrative. You got to actually look at, is this going to move the price up or down? And so that's a very difficult thing to do. And again, it goes back to like, you can't get caught up emotionally. But I think a lot of it just comes from not only testing yourself over time, but also grew up in a family with 4 boys, right? Four brothers. There's 5 of us total. Like, when I was on CNBC in 2019 and these dudes were talking shit, I was like,
this is light work.
Yeah, y'all picked the wrong guy. I've been training my whole life for this, right?
I was built for this.
Yeah, like literally. And it's funny to think about, and anyone who's got siblings that they like argued with or talk shit or whatever, like they'll laugh, right? They're like, yeah, okay, I got it. But usually what happens is people go on and there's this like guard, like, oh, I'm on national television, I'm supposed to act a certain way. Like I was on there, I remember that day very specifically. Kevin O'Leary pointing his finger at me across the thing, and we didn't really know each other at that point, right? And I was just like, yo, fuck it. They might not invite me back, but I'm going down swinging, right? Like you're not going to come at me on national television and make me look like a fool. And so I think there was this element of I had nothing to lose. Because the other thing too was like, there was very, very low probability anything I said on there outside of something that just was, egregious by society standards, I was going to have any blowback from. I wasn't going to get fired from a job. I wasn't going to, there was none of that. And so I had a lot more leeway to kind of be myself. And so I do credit a lot of like just growing up in a big family. And then the other thing is just like, I seen a lot of people who were super confident in the consensus view be wrong. Mm-hmm. And so once you, again, have the pattern recognition and say, the more people that believe in something, the higher probability is that it's wrong. You just you'll see it everywhere. You'll literally just walk down the street and you'll be like, man, that is a long line to get in that restaurant. And the one across the street has no one. What are the odds that one is literally 100x better? Probably not that high. It may be good food, but how many restaurants in New York City that are deemed to be the best? Actually, it's the marketing has made them the best. But when you taste the food, you're like, I mean, it was good. But that wasn't worth waiting in line for 3 hours, right? Yeah. And so it's the same thing just over and over again throughout society, whether it's literally food you eat all the way to the, financial assets. It's just a lot of people, it's easier to go through life not being disagreeable, right? My life would be way less stressful, way easier if every time someone says something, I say, yeah, I agree. I agree. But, if you're somebody like me, that's cop out. Yeah. I don't agree. You're wrong. Yeah. Go from there.
Yeah. I'm curious, has your confidence ever wavered? Because I think one of the things, right?
Daily. Fucking daily.
Like, look it up right here.
With different topics. Right? Think about if you and I were to sit here and debate something, and it goes back to like the old adage of strong opinions loosely held. Really, really hard to do, right? But again, you got to keep that distance between who you are as a person and what you believe. Because the second those two things become the same, you can't have a loosely held opinion. Because now when somebody attacks it, they're attacking you. You have this emotional response. And so if I ever have a position intellectually that I think somebody has a good point, I actually try as quickly as possible to figure out, are they taking it far enough? So let's say you and I sit down and there's a topic that we want to discuss, and I take position A, you take position B. And all of a sudden I realize, wait a second, you're making good points. Actually, not only am I wrong about A, but you don't believe B enough. I've gone from one end to the extreme of literally being diabolically or like opposite and opposed to you to now I believe your position more than you believe you. Right? And so like, how does that happen? Well, like you really have to evaluate the information for what it is. And so like, is that a loss of confidence in my original opinion? Sure. But you also could argue like, no, my confidence only increased because I've just shown the ability to actually change my mind when the facts change. So am I increasing my confidence in my decision-making, or am I decreasing my confidence in my decision-making because my original, assessment was incorrect? It's all about perspective.
You know, the most important thing I just realized that you've said is that you're a learner. I think you said that. I'm like a lifelong learner. And so when you talk about the difference between who you are and what you believe, the reason why you're able to pivot in position is because your actual core identity is that you're a learner. Your core identity is not that you're the Bitcoin guy, or that you are the one that just, I love this company and I'll always love this company. And because the identity is you're a learner, it's once you learn new information, you can change your mind. I'm curious, I want to get to that, the who you are. Has that ever wavered? Because here's the thing, right? You've had a certain level of success. You have like financially, like media wise, I guess, in terms of like having an audience. There's a certain level of validation to who Pomp is right now. But that validation did not always exist. And so when we remove that validation, that's when the who you are, it can be challenged a bit. And when things aren't working and you're kind of starting to look around, because we all have those moments, no matter how small they are, where we look around and we see other people doing things and it feels like they're winning more. Like it feels like they're further ahead, and it's aggravating, it's frustrating. I'm curious, did the confidence in that ever waver?
So there's something called a smoke check that this is an idea I came up with a long time ago, and it came out of a personal experience. So when I first left school, I actually started it in school, but when I left college, I started a business. And I'm not playing small ball, right? I want to build a big business. I want to make a lot of money, right? It was kind of like, hey, if we're going to do it, let's do it. And by anyone else's standards, they've been like, oh, that was pretty successful. That was above average success, right? To me, it was a failure though. And so I was pissed. I didn't really show it, but I was frustrated because I was like, man, I had expectations that were way up here and reality was way down here, right? If you think about kind of like happiness is as close to expectations and reality as you can get versus the difference. And so I took a second swing. And that one again, above average success compared to most people, nowhere near what my expectations were. And so I started to think like, can I actually do this? But rather than sit and like kind of ponder that for a long period of time, I just said to myself, no, I am excellent 0 to 1, right? Actually getting something started, building momentum and like getting it off the ground. I have no clue what to do once there are signs of this starting to work, right? Because basically I would get it to work and then I would just plateau. And I was like banging my head against the wall. And so I decided, I was like, I got to go get that information. And I had a choice to make. I could either go to like a business school or something and try to learn business. Thank God I didn't do that, right? Because I would have to pay money to have people who were basically academics teach me how to run a business. Instead, I chose to get paid to learn. I went to Facebook. And when I got there, very quickly, a team that I was running had a lot of success, like above expectation success internally. The company made a lot of money. I started to get some accolades internally from the executive team. I eventually went and worked directly with the executive team based off of that success, et cetera. And that's when I was like, oh, I smoke checked myself. I had for 2, 3, 4 years, whatever it was, been banging my head against the wall, wondering, do I have what it takes? Can I do this? Do I actually know how to build these products and find success and drive revenue and do all this stuff? And then I basically jumped in the deep end with the Sharks. It's probably one of the best operating teams in the world. If you go back in the early 2000s of Facebook, had an incredible success. And so when I talk about that smoke check, sometimes you think you're blowing smoke up your own ass, right? You're like, I can't do it. I don't know how to do this. It's not working. The feedback loop isn't there. But when you smoke check yourself, you just go put yourself in an environment where it's like, it's going to be very obvious. There's going to be no confusion. Either you're good or you're not. There's no excuses at Facebook. They got all the data. They got all the tools. They got the smartest people in the world. Funding's not a problem. Like, it is set up for success. If you couldn't succeed in that environment, take your, go home and go get the investment banking job or something. But when you smoke check yourself, you're just realizing, no, I'm not blowing smoke up my ass. I actually can do this. Now what I got to go do is when I go do it for myself again, I got to recreate this environment. I got to make sure money's not a problem. I got to make sure I'm working with the smartest people. I got to make sure that I've got, the right technology stack, like all these different things. And so I got a crash course of education, but really all I was doing was I basically was testing myself. Now it sounds insane when you're a 25-year-old kid and you go work at Facebook and everyone there is like, hey, this is going to be my job for the next 10 years. Like basically I made it. When I got the job at Facebook, I don't want to say who the person is, but a buddy of mine, he managed money for some NBA players. He's like, Pomp, you don't realize you hit the lottery. And I was like, what? And he was like walking me through the NBA contracts. And he's like, you, with your salary, are going to make more money over your career than these guys. And he was like, they're going to make some big lump sums up front, but they're going to get it for 4 years. Right? And it's all about the trajectory. It's not about how do you get the lump sums. Now, yes, LeBron, right, is not only going to play for 20 years, but he's also going to get paid a ton of money. But he was talking about like the average NBA player. And so that's when it really started to hit me. I was like, oh, wait a second. Business is the greatest game in the world because other than golf, is the only sport you could play forever. Right? How many people do we know today that are in their 90s that are still playing this game? Warren Buffett, Charlie Munger, right? Rupert Murdoch. You just go down the line. They're all 80s, 90 years old. They're still playing this game. At some point, you can't swing the golf club anymore, right? And you don't make any money doing it if you're an amateur. And so that's when I was just like, oh, I want to become a pro at this thing. And to me, what is the practice? What is all the things that a professional athlete would do? It's learning. The more learning you do, the better you become at the game of business. The better you become at the game of business, the better positioned you are to play for longer.
It's interesting. I remember one of the people I always looked to was Kobe Bryant. And I remember he gave this interview after he retired. Because obviously, like one of the greatest basketball players to ever play, like an icon in the field of basketball. And we admire athletes so much. They're like superheroes. And so when you think about Kobe Bryant, you think that the pinnacle of his life should be when he's on the Lakers and he's in his prime and he's with Shaq or he's with Pau Gasol and he's winning those rings. And I remember they asked him in an interview, they're like, Kobe, how did you step away from like basketball? Like how have you been dealing with that? And he said, the next 10 years of my life should be better than the last 10 years. And if it's not, it's a failure. And he had that mindset of constantly learning, right? Whereas I think you see a lot of NBA or just athletes in general, the pinnacle of their life was when they were playing. And then everything else is like a downgrade based on that pinnacle. And I guess it shows the value of having that identity of I'm just a learner. Because then when you're just a learner, it's like, okay, what is there to learn? There's something objective about it. You can just go back to the facts. I think the difficulty is that we all have insecurities and we all have emotions. And here's what I mean. When you smoke checked yourself, it was like, okay, I objectively don't know if I can achieve this thing. So I'm going to put myself in an environment where there's no excuses and we're going to see if I can do this thing. It's a very objective, it's an objective way to go about it. It's like, it's either going to be right or it's going to be wrong. The difficulty is we all have this kind of voice in our head, which is like, I don't know, maybe it's what the kid in school said to you in the playground or like what your parents said to you or like these insecurities, which are almost part of our personality. And it talks to you and it's a bit like, oh, you could never do that thing. Like, you're just not made for this. And that's the thing that's difficult to quiet is like this emotion, this thought that I've always had. That's what makes it makes us doubt the facts.
Disagreeableness. Do you agree with the voice in your head, or do you tell it to fuck off? That's all it comes down to, right?
Yeah.
A lot of people who have the voice in their head, they want to turn it down. Man, get out of my head. Get out of my head. Right? I say, turn that shit up. I disagree. Because the louder that voice in your head is, okay, I'm going to disprove you today. And you do that enough times, all of a sudden, years later, like, damn, okay. I didn't think we could accomplish what we accomplished. So it goes back to disagreeableness. And I think that most people in life, because it's comfortable, it's easy, their default state is agreeableness. My wife is an angel. Imagine living with me. I think we should do X. My default is, I don't think so. Right? It's got to be an absolute nightmare for her.
Yeah.
But the same reason why that's probably difficult is the same reason why I probably have success in other parts of my life. And so learning, right, to kind of know when to turn up the disagreeableness and when to turn it down is actually a really acquired skill when you have kind of this perspective on life. And so in some weird way, it's almost like you want to have a high disagreeableness with the inner voice. You want to have a very low disagreeableness with the people closest to you, your family and really close friends. And then anything past that kind of first concentric circle, turn that shit back up, right? And so like, again, I always use the word maturity because I think back to, things I thought or said or did when I was between the ages of like 15 and like pretty much yesterday, right? And you're just like, wow, okay, I'm glad that I learned and I kind of matured. But at the same time, you're just like, that's literally all this is. It's just every single thing can be boiled back to whether you agree with the status quo, whether you agree with the voice in your head, whether you agree with what the expectations are from the people around you, or do you have the courage to fucking draw a line in the sand and say, this is what I want to do with my life, and you go and you do it. And it makes people uncomfortable. But talk to any single person who has had success in their life. One of the best people to go talk like a 65, 70-year-old business owner. You ever seen the meme online? It's like, starting something and this person like fresh face, like, haha, yeah, let's go do this. And then like, they're like afterwards and they just got like a cigarette out of their mouth. They got no hair, look like they just got beat up, right? And they're like still standing.
Yeah.
Just go talk to a 65, 70-year-old business owner. And they're the second picture. But they'll tell you somewhere along the way, they had to change. And like, I think back to early in my career, I literally in my head sometimes would be disagreeing with what was going on and I would keep quiet. I don't want to be too disruptive. I needed to be a team player, all this stuff. Now, I don't care what's going on. If I hear something that I don't agree with, I say it. And some of it may be that there's been external validation, so then I get confidence to do it. But a lot of it is you just see enough of it. And you're like, I'm right more times than I'm wrong. But it's only because I'm willing to iterate on my position until I find the right one. And so it becomes this very weird kind of obsession of like, will you become complacent or not? If you're like a mid-level manager at an accounting firm in the middle of nowhere and you go to work every day and your general attitude towards work is just like, okay, you're doing yourself a disservice. You're complacent, you're deteriorating both intellectually and also probably emotionally. And everyone around you knows that's how you are. One of the great insights of running businesses now for enough time, the employees always know the truth. There's been people that we've had to fire over the years, and literally other employees come to me and say, thank you. Hey, why didn't you say anything to me 6 months ago? Agreeableness. They didn't know if it was their place, they did this or that or whatever, right? But they knew. And sometimes they know before you know because they're the one who deals with said person on a day-to-day basis. And so if you just take that as like an insight and you talk to founders and stuff, they'll say, look, you'll lose the respect of your team if you don't fire the underperformers because they know, right? And so you learn all these little lessons, but ultimately I just dry them all back to there's too much agreeableness in the world. And if people learned and were confident enough to be more disagreeable, completely change society for the better.
Okay, so you have to be confident to be disagreeable. I want to talk about the learning point because one of the things actually as I was researching you and just looking at your background, you've been able to go into different fields and be successful. I think, and maybe it's because I'm experiencing it now, I think one of the most difficult things to do, I think, is to build an audience being yourself. Like pomp. Like I even think about that, the word, right? Like if you think about some of the biggest brands, it's just, it's a word like that. I think about like LeBron, Kobe, Dion. Like it's like Elon.
The fact you're
like
even mentioning me anywhere near those guys is ridiculous, but go ahead.
But like I guess it's maybe you haven't reached the scale of them yet, but there's meaning just in the name is what I'm getting at, right?
You want people to come back and watch this interview years from now?
Yeah, I'm making the prediction right now.
No,
this is my disagreeable.
Repeat yet. No, I'm joking. I'm completely kidding. Go ahead.
No, we're holding you to that point. We're clipping that right
tomorrow.
There.
I just stopped tweeting.
Yeah. But there's this. I think what I observed is like you're able to go into different fields and learn fast and kind of pick things up. And I even think about before we started recording, you said that you were doing a podcast like a day. I think about like how prolific you are. Kind of map out to me, like, what is that process? I think there's a lot of people out there that they're doing one thing, but they really want to switch over to something else and be able to dominate there. What's your mindset when you're thinking about switching over?
Do it. Stop fucking waiting. Just do it. If you went and you talked to a lot of people who've worked with me over the years and you know, people will leave one of our companies or something, I always ask them like, hey, you know, positives, negatives, what did you learn? All this kind of stuff. The single theme that I've heard over and over again, which is surprising to me because I don't think this way, is they're like, I learned how to make fast decisions from you. Right? And I don't know why that's like a thing. I guess other people don't make fast decisions, but you know, if we're sitting in a meeting and we're discussing something, usually I want to leave with a decision. Whereas what other people do, they think about it for 5 weeks and then make a decision. Like, I don't know. It's just like unnatural to me. Right. So the reason why I say that is the day that I wake up and I'm like, I want to figure out X, or I think this thing is interesting, or I want to go do something else, I literally start that day and it's just start. And ultimately what you find is that regardless of the industry, I'm doing the same thing. It doesn't matter what the industry is. I want to meet interesting people. I want to learn from them. I want them to then tell me a bunch of different resources about their thing, right? And then I want to go read those things and learn information from that. I was doing literally this morning, I was on a call for a potential advertiser for a media property we have. And the guy was telling me all about, you know, his business and stuff. And so I literally basically derailed the whole conversation. I started asking him questions about, well, how does this work? And where's this? And then at the end of the call, I said, by the way, we'll send you the media kit, all this stuff. Can you give me some resources where I can go learn more about this thing we were talking about? And he was kind of like confused. He was like, is this like a trick question? I was like, no, like I genuinely am going to go spend probably 2 or 3 hours later tonight. And I'm going to go read about this thing because it's interesting to me. And the reason why I got interested in it is because he said a couple of things where I was like, oh my God, there is a shortage of a commodity in the world. No one outside of this industry that this guy works in is talking about. And it is a massive problem. That's interesting. Why is it such a big problem and threatens so many different industries, yet no one's talking about it? I'm going to go find out tonight, right? And maybe it turns out that it's absolutely nothing and this guy doesn't even know what he's talking about, right? Or actually there's tons of people talking about it and I'm the moron because I don't know that they're talking about it. But that's a perfect example of I'm just going to go learn about it. I'm not an expert on commodities, but you don't need to be an expert. The experts don't know shit either, right? And the second that you start to realize everyone's just figuring it out, then all of a sudden you become dangerous. And if you really go back and you look at 2020, 2021, pretty good test, right? There's a lot of people who've been let off the hook. Don't even touch the public health stuff. Just go right to the finance stuff. And you go back and you look at how many people said if we print trillions of dollars, and we don't need to worry about inflation. If you're a journalist and you were repeating that stuff, how much money did you cost the American public? Right? If you told hundreds of thousands or millions of people that inflation wasn't coming and they listened to you, scary, right? Now, to their credit, right? And especially the good journalists, they were simply just interviewing, quote unquote, the experts. So should we hold the journalist accountable? Probably not. Okay, let's move to the experts. The Fed was saying it. still got his job, right? Treasury still got her job. We just looked through it all. Like we were so wrong. We were off by hundreds of %. And so if the experts didn't get it right, why listen to them again? Now, what ends up being interesting is if you can think independently and think critically, and you come to the same conclusion as the experts, that's a data point. Okay, cool. From ground up, I thought about this thing. I went and I researched it. I talked to other people who consider themselves experts, and I came to the same conclusion as so-and-so. Great. But there's other times where I do that and I come to the very, very different conclusion. And so if you really look at 2020 to 2021, the people who made money are the people who actually didn't believe the experts. And so it calls into question who had the true expertise for that situation, for those inputs, for that specific outcome. Obviously not the people everyone considered experts. And so what you have to be able to do, again, going back to being unemotional, that is not ultimately a conviction of those people as being stupid. People are highly intelligent. I wouldn't want their job. It's hard, right? But what it does is it reinforces the fact that in that situation with those inputs for that specific output, they were incorrect. And so you have to go do the work yourself. And the next time that there's a situation, you have to understand, what are they saying? What is their logic behind what they're saying? Go do your own work and come back and say, do I agree with their logic? Do I agree with their conclusion? And do that over and over and over again. And if you're not intensely like curious, it's exhausting, right? Because you'll start being like, oh my God, I got to research all this shit all the time. But if you enjoy doing it, it's like, I can't wait. There's times where I'm doing stuff and my wife, my brothers, they'll tell you, they're like, dude, he's so disinterested in X, right? Because all he's thinking about in his head is, I got to go and I want to learn about this thing. Or we'll go and recently I went to dinner with someone. There's 6 people at dinner, and somebody that I know, I'm actually an investor in his company, his wife came. And his wife runs a jewelry business, custom jewelry. And she sat down, we were all, all the pleasantries, all the stuff. And I just turned to her at one point. I said, I apologize in advance, but I need you to give me a deep dive on this. And she started laughing. She's like, what do you mean? And I was like, how much do you sell it for? Where do you get the materials for? How much do those cost? Right? Where's the marketing? How did you start? I just started grilling her. And she kept laughing. I was like, why are you laughing? And she was like, she pointed to her fiance and she goes, he does the same thing. Right? She was like, literally, he just can't help himself. And so it's interesting because him and I obviously get along, right? But we didn't know that about each other, that we act the same way. At another dinner I was at, there's a gentleman, he probably runs one of the hottest movie production studios in Hollywood right now, right? And we were sitting there, and this guy, I felt bad for him. I was just grilling him for like 30 minutes, right? And he literally, at the end, he was like, why are you asking me so many questions? And I was like, I'm just interested. Like, obviously, movies drive so much of culture and society and geopolitics and like all these different things. And you decide what movies get made. And some of it's because of economics, some of it's because of personal interest, like all these different things. And he was like, I never talked to anyone who was evaluating why do certain movies get made? How did the studios make those decisions? Not through the lens of could I invest and make money, but literally it'll determine what people talk about. How many people talk about Oppenheimer and Barbie this summer? Because some person decided to write a script, then gave it to another person who decided to greenlight and say, yeah, let's make this movie. And it determines society. And so it goes back to, if you're not curious, how many people you meet in a day that you don't ask them any questions? Right? And you're just like, whatever. But then you start asking questions and you realize, it's like Pompliano says all the time. If you can't learn something from every single person you meet, that's because you didn't ask the right questions. And so if you just take that approach, like life becomes a lot more interesting.
You know what's interesting? It's interesting from my vantage point being 25, is you grow up like the first, I guess, if you count in university, like 21, 22 years of your life. And it's like you learn that the game is played one way, and then you get into the real world and the game is actually played the exact opposite. And here's what I mean, right? If you think about in school, I almost think about what you were saying with COVID. COVID was almost the ultimate lesson of there are no experts. It's like, oh, the CDC said this. A year later, that's actually wrong. There are no experts. If you think about what you learn in school, it's like, this teacher is the expert. Everything they tell you, just listen to them. And even, and you know what's funny? Even when I started my research document on you, just with following you, I think the one thing that I wrote, the top line, I said, the game of life. And the reason I said the game, it was strategic because I felt like you kind of understood certain rules and then you were just applying it over and over again. And I think the problem is I think the majority of people, and I know this firsthand because I felt it when I just had the rules of life completely wrong. I was going into the workplace and thinking like, you know, I'm just going to outwork people. And that is an advantage, but that's not the whole game. It's not just outwork people equals success. Mm-hmm. But growing up, that's kind of what you hear, right? It's like, I'm just going to study the most. I'll get the best I'll get the best marks on the test. It's not exactly like that in the real world.
Well, calls the question is like that even the right game?
Mm.
If you study the most and you get the best grade on the test, congratulations. What does that mean? Maybe you don't even remember the information a week from now.
Mm.
Right? Like, is it the right game to play?
But at that time, it is. When you're a student, it feels like the right game to play, right? Because it's the respect you get from your other classmates, the universities that you go to, the opportunity. Everything as a student is predicated on, I got the best mark in this test. When you're outside in the world, the game flips. It's different.
Nah, the game is always the same. They just tricked you.
Mm.
Right? I had a very low GPA my first semester in college. I think I had a 1.8 GPA.
Mm.
That's like, for those who don't know what that is, that's like F. That's like real bad. Like, I'm almost embarrassed to say that, right? And I played football in college, and the coaches came to me and they were like, hey.
Mm.
It wasn't, you know, like if your mom or dad gets mad at you, that's bad. But if they're disappointed, it's worse.
Yeah.
That was like below disappointed. That was like, yo, man, like you may not be here, you know, next year if you don't fix this. And then, you know, in their eyes, I turned it around. All of a sudden I started getting 3 6s and all, you know, all kinds of crazy great grades. And it was just, I knew it didn't matter, but it mattered to them.
Mm.
Right. And so the game that I realized that I was playing was not get good grades because you're going to, you know, get a good job or any of this other stuff. It was, I have to do this because I need to help these guys out who took a chance on me to get me into this school. Mm. And so now all of a sudden I realize, like, who cares about the grade? The grade is a fucking number on a piece of paper that, how many people have ever asked you, where'd you go to school and what was your GPA?
Never.
What'd you get in the real world?
It's incredibly disappointing.
Right? Like, especially if you got straight A's. You're like, I'm waiting to flex on people, right? And then they're just like, whatever. Yeah. Like, and so there's like this huge anticlimactic moment of like, once you get the piece of paper, nobody cares about the paper, right? For many jobs. There's some jobs where it still matters, but for many jobs, that's it. And so I had another experience in college that kind of reiterates this. So when I was a junior in college, 2-3 weeks into the school year, I got deployed to Iraq. And so I spent 3 semesters, a year and a half, out of school. I came back, and luck of the draw, one of the classes that I took was about like American politics or geopolitics or something. And somehow the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan came up. Now, mind you, you can imagine exactly what's going on at a liberal arts college with a professor who, he didn't go to the military, right? He's sitting up there, he's chirping about whatever he's saying. And I just sat there. Like, I don't care. You know, it's just kind of like, whatever. He's talking about whatever he's doing. I frankly don't even know if I was paying attention. And all of a sudden, a buddy of mine who's sitting next to me, who probably was trying to be somewhat of a smart ass, but also was trying to basically be like, hey, this sounds kind of crazy, raised his hand and he goes, well, why don't we just ask him? He was just there.
You're like, oh God.
And so, you know, I kind of was like, what are you guys talking about? You know, like whatever. And he repeated it. And I remember just being like, that is so wrong in terms of like, yeah, that's like the public narrative, but like the ground truth is like so different that I almost was just like, it's not even worth like getting into this. Again, high disagreeableness, though I couldn't help myself. And so I just told him. And I think it was like a defining moment when I think back about it. It's just like, that was the professor. But I realized he was talking about something that he had no clue about. He probably just read the news. Like, what are you standing up there lecturing us on something that I literally probably had as close of a experience to reality as possible. and you're going to tell me. And I immediately just thought, like, let me just go through like all my classes. Like, this is probably every class. It's just I don't know any better in these other classes, right? So when I'm studying something that the professor's telling me, I don't have the lived experience to tell them they're right or wrong. So maybe I should just go find the people who do and be like, yo, this is what I'm hearing, right? Like, is this right? And sometimes it was. Sometimes they'd be like, yeah, that's exactly how it is. Like they nailed it. Other times they would be like, no, it's not. And so it was like a perfect example of like, not that they're always wrong or that the public narrative is always wrong. It's just like you should go do the work yourself. And it'll help instill confidence in your perspective because you did the work.
Are you playing the right game? I think about that. And it brings me back to what I said at the beginning, that Naval quote. The 3 big decisions in life: what you do, where you live, and who you're with. I want to end by talking about the final one, who you're with. I reached out to I emailed your wife, Paulina, ahead of this interview. And I was like, what should I ask her?
Did she respond?
She responded. Thank God.
Wow.
Yeah.
She don't respond to my emails, so you got lucky.
Feel lucky. And I asked her, I was like, what should I ask Pomp? I need to ask him something no one's ever asked before. And she said, you want to know what she said?
Sure.
I think you're going to like it. The Morgan Library. Your first date with Paulina at the Morgan Library.
Yeah.
JP Morgan's personal library. All of your friends, whenever you come in the city, you'll take to the Morgan Library. It's somewhere that inspires you. It's somewhere that's obviously significant. Why?
He did the thing that I think everyone's trying to do. He knew exactly what he wanted. He went and he did it. And he was able to build a world around him, made him happy. So anyone who's not been, Morgan Library is JP Morgan's preserved library, his office, etc. Right? And they do, everything library or museums do. They got, galleries and different artists come in and all that stuff. And that's nice. Plina gets upset when we go because they usually say, would you like to go just to the library, or would you like to see our exquisite, collection of whatever? And I don't care about that. Like, I just want to go to the library. And she's like, you at least play the game of like going and just peeking in the other room
again.
Yeah, just like I'm just honest with them. I said, listen, we just shortcut this. I know exactly where to go. Actually, I don't even need the map, right? Yeah. Like whatever. And so I enjoy bringing people because actually, like one of the coolest parts is people walk in. It's one of those places you just walk in when you walk into his office or you walk into his library. And I brought somebody recently who works with us. And you could just see in his face, he was like, damn. It just, the importance of the room, the feeling of seriousness, of impact on the world. It's like almost like you walk in the thing, and it's like a ghost hits you upside the head. Is, hey, knock it off. Whatever's going on in your life, forget it right now. Like, pay attention. Right? And so his office is just cool. But when you walk in the library, what I said to the guy who came with us recently, I said, this was a computer. He had the first computer. Today, every single one of us has information at our fingertips. This man had 3-story library, personal library. Any piece of information he needed, he could go and he could get out of his library. And learning was so important to him. Access to information was so important to him that he built this magnificent thing. And so a lot of people see like, oh, this is a cool Instagram photo. I've taken one, I posted on Instagram. It's cool, right? But to me, it's more about, this is a guy who realized what he needed to be successful. And then he was willing to spend whatever it took next to him. And so he could literally walk across the hallway and get any piece of information he wanted. And if you go through and you don't just kind of get enthralled by the room and you actually look at some of the books, many times he actually has the same book in different languages. Right? And then you start to look at it, and some of them are religious texts, some of them are math, some of them are science, some of them are, history, whatever. This guy wasn't just interested in business. He was interested in the world. He had this like insane curiosity. And so there's not that many people today who have things where you can evaluate the curiosity because we have the internet, right? It's kind of like if I walked in here and I was like, hey, here's all the books that I read. I got physical books. I'm not going to bring them in here. Somebody walks in with a Kindle. You don't know if they got one book or they got 10,000 books on their Kindle. It just looks like a Kindle. But this guy, 3 stories, built basically like the mecca of learning at the time. And he had an advantage in the world. And so when you walk in there and you just feel that, you're like, all right, this is cool. It's inspiring. It's all those things. But then when you go downstairs, on the wall, they have a bunch of things from the early days of different businesses. And one of them is one of the first shares that was issued by U.S. Steel Corporation, which J.P. Morgan put together, basically acquired a bunch of other businesses and combined them under U.S. Steel. And it's signed by Charles Schwab. And so you realize, these ballers ran together, right? Like J.P. Morgan's got a share that is literally given to him and signed by Charles Schwab, right? And then you think back to all of those steel companies and Carnegie and you just realize like, these aren't like in today's day and age where we're like, oh, LeBron James is playing basketball, Jeff Bezos is building, Amazon, and Elon Musk is doing something else. No, they were literally working together. And sure, Elon and Bezos probably do some things together here and there or whatever, but more so in today's society, we actually are told they all fight with each other, right? They all are competing with each other. They're all constantly, using social media to attack each other and all this stuff. And I'm sure these guys talk shit about each other behind their backs and did all kinds of the normal human nature stuff back then. But when you see that share certificate and you realize sometimes the best thing in life is just get around the right people. And just run, right? And that's what those guys did. And so that place specifically, I think, is it's like a known secret, right? Like Google it, it's out there, whatever. But a lot of people are like, why would I ever go there? It's a library. And then you walk in, and I'm undefeated in taking anyone there, and them not immediately becoming like at least 50 to 100% more ambitious. Right? Because they're like, these dudes didn't have computers and they were doing this shit, right? They didn't have smartphones. Like, they didn't have any of this stuff, right? There was no podcast back then. There was nothing. And look what they were able to accomplish. And so you see it manifesting now in like public conversation, right? I don't know if you've seen the recent, I'll call it a controversy. Some people just call it science. The Golden Gate Bridge was built and it cost like, I don't know, in today's dollars, like $500, $600 million. I forget what it was. And it was built in X amount of time, a year, right? Or whatever it is. And now they're putting nets because so many people jump off the bridge and try to commit suicide. They're putting nets, and the nets are going to cost more than it costs to actually build the bridge in today's dollars. And it's going to take like 2 or 3 times longer. And it's like, what happened? You're telling me that our ancestors were able to do this faster and cheaper, that we're able to put the nets up? That seems kind of crazy, right? You just go through society. And so I think that a lot of what I think about now is the best critique against my life is you can do all the learning that you want. What do you do with it? Right? It's kind of like you can have the smartest teacher in the world, but if they're just the teacher, what'd they really accomplish? Sure, maybe they taught students and those students went on to do things, but really it's like, what is the actual impact? And so not only do we need to return, I think, to kind of a nation of curiosity and learning and kind of all these things we've talked about, more disagreeableness, all that. But like, maybe we should celebrate some of this, the actual results, right? And if you want those nets put up, why don't you go to everyone you say, whoever can do it the cheapest and the fastest will pay you double, right? Some government contracts now have started to become lowest bidder or, all that type of stuff. But if we really use the free market and make people put skin in the game, we could completely transform society. Because ultimately what people really want is they want better living conditions, better pay, better, safety, whatever it is. But that takes people actually doing things. And so in some weird way, when you walk in the Morgan Library, you realize he was a lifelong learner, but he also got shit done. And there's some people who do that today, but we could all benefit from having many more do it.
No, that's great. That's great. You know what? I'm curious.
Have you ever gone, by the way?
I haven't. I need to go now.
I'll take you on Sunday this week if you want.
Let's do it.
All right.
I'm down. Let's do it. I'm curious, what was Paulina's reaction? You said most people that go there, they become at least twice as ambitious. What was her reaction when you went on that first date?
It was her idea. Yeah, I didn't even know the place existed. So it wasn't our first date. She may be confused on that, but it was very early on. And I think she told me that she had a surprise for me. I didn't really know her that well, but I was like, I was already calling her my girlfriend, right? So like, I was in. She said she had a surprise for me. She was going to take me somewhere. So immediately you're like, I don't really know this girl well enough to like have confidence that this is going to go well. Should I bring a snack? Maybe we're going to like go somewhere boring, right? Like what's going on here? And so she made me guess. And I was trying to think about like, the conversations we had prior and things we had talked about, whatever. And for some reason, my guess was that she was going to take me to, I think I said like a computer museum or something. Sounds like directionally correct, but my thought process was just limited to what I knew. I didn't know that this existed. And so I asked her afterwards and she was like, I don't know. I just thought that you would find it interesting. And I was like, why? She's like, well, I knew that you liked going to like libraries and museums and all that type of stuff and like really studying and learning, whatever. But then she remembered an offhand comment I had made the very first time we met, which was she asked me what my favorite movie was. And I said, I don't know about movie, but my favorite show is the History Channel did an 8-part documentary called The Men Who Built America. And it chronicles Carnegie and Morgan and John Rockefeller and all these guys. And a lot of people would say, oh, that's just like somebody who's obsessed with capitalism, making money. It's not why I'm interested in it. I'm interested in it because they literally built the country we live in. And so far, we have the best system, both from a governance standpoint, from a prosperity, a liberty, etc. And so how many people understand how they did it? You don't have to go read a book. You don't have to be bored by, the 700-page biography of Andrew Carnegie. It's good, but like you don't have to do that if you don't have the discipline to do it. You can go watch this. It's entertaining and it tells a story. And you walk away and you say, what happened? Right? These are people who literally were able to build so much of what's around us. Right? And maybe I'll use a good example. New York City. We're on an island and there is a subway underneath us. Just think about that. How hard that is. And they figured it out. Right? And it moves millions of people a day. A train under the ground on an island. And we didn't even think about it. We're just like, yeah, of course. Move out of my way. The door's going to close, right? I got to get to work. But somebody at some point was like, I'm going to go and I'm going to build that. Another example is there's a book called The Rise and Fall of American Growth. And in it, they talk about an elevator. It took an elevator to get up here to this floor. The invention of the elevator drastically changed American society because it allowed us to go up instead of have to go horizontal. And so you think about how stupid of an invention that is, right? I'm too lazy to walk up the stairs to the second floor, so I want to be able to have a box that takes me up there. But that invention literally allowed New York City to be possible, right? And so you start to like uncover some of these things and you realize everything around us was created by somebody who built something. And so when you go back and you say like, okay, well, what was Polina's reaction when we go in the Morgan Library? I think she was just like, oh, I get it. And now, I mean, if you look at what she's done with the profile or with her book, she probably studies even more than I do, right? And so it's one of the things that we really enjoy is one at dinner, maybe she wants me to chill out a little bit with the questions, but like she's asked a lot of questions herself, right? But also like we'll spend time talking about different books or, people we discovered. Like one of the things, and it's like so stupid, but we'll get excited about it. It's like, have you ever heard of this person X? Well, look at this talk I found on YouTube, or look at this thing that they wrote, or I heard in a book, somebody mentioned them as like their inspiration for doing this thing. You feel like you discovered a secret, right? And so, I don't know, you'd have to ask her the exact like implications. But if I remember correctly, shortly thereafter, she started the profile. right? And so like whether implicitly or explicitly, like ambition increased. I think the Morgan Library should they should give us like a cut of all the sales we drive there after this.
Commission from the Morgan
They
Library.
can give it all to you. But yeah, I mean, it is one of those places. It's special.
No, that's a great way to end, man.
They wouldn't let me get married there though, so I got beef with them.
We're still going on Sunday though, right?
Yeah, we can go on Sunday.
Okay.
Yeah.
Your beef can resume
For anyone who doesn't know, if I remember correctly, if you go during the week, it's fairly inexpensive to go. And then on Sundays, from like 3 to 5, they make it available for anyone. Right. So what I like to do is I like to go and maybe I go at like 2:30 and I'll pay them. And then I invite anyone else. I look, it's free. You can just come.
Yeah.
Right. And they can walk in and check it all out.
Yeah. No, this is a powerful conversation, man. I'm so happy you came on.
I appreciate your time.
If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to the channel. We're having fire conversations every week on the podcast. Before we end the episode, a quick word from our sponsor, Free Agency. What if I told you there is a good chance you're leaving money on the table in your career? It would kind of annoy you a bit, right? Well, Free Agency aims to stop that. They represent and manage talent in the tech industry. Here's how they do it. First, they provide you with a dedicated talent agent. Think about this as your career quarterback. They understand you and your career goals. Based on that understanding, they bring you suitable interviews at top firms. You focus on smashing the interview, and together with their network, research, negotiation expertise, they will make sure you get a top of market salary. Stop job searching alone and start building your dream career today with Free Agency.